Ian. Thank you, Kelly. So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce this morning's keynote speakers launching this year's Broken Arrow Conference. Jeremie Saunders has been a good friend to Cystic Fibrosis Canada for a number of years. In fact, 2 years ago, Jeremie was scheduled to serve as Master of Ceremonies at the 2017 Broken Arrow Conference when, as many of you know, life with cystic fibrosis intervened. When we were planning for this year's conference, we'd heard glowing reports of a presentation at the SPORE conference last November from this group of individuals from Sickboy Podcast, Jeremie Saunders and friends. And we knew that we had to ask Jeremie if he could come again. Learning from Jeremie's battle with cystic fibrosis, Jeremie, his friend Brian Stever, who is here with us today, and Taylor McGillivray launched the Sickboy Podcast in 2015. It's a podcast that has been a huge hit, garnering over 1.5 million downloads yearly. I guess it might be a little crass to say, but they take a mickey out of that. They laugh at that. And we're fortunate to have Jeremie and Brian with us today to open this year's Broken Arrow Conference by encouraging us to use humor to broach difficult conversations. And join me in welcoming Jeremie Saunders and Brian Stever to the stage.
Hello, everyone. We're going to share this mic, Brian. Can everyone hear me?
Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Can everyone hear Brian?
Thank you for that warm welcome.
Yes, perfect. Good job.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to start this off by asking you all a few questions. And in response, I would appreciate it if you replied with a hearty round of applause, okay? So the first question, how many of you, if you were given the appropriate amount of time, how many of you think you could recall the most delicious meal you've ever eaten in your life?
Okay. By round of applause, how many of you think you could recall the most beautiful sunrise or sunset you've ever witnessed?
All right, how about this one? By a round of applause, how many of you think you could recall the most mind-melting orgasm you've ever had? All right, thank you for your honesty. I love it. It always takes a minute for like one person to go, okay. Okay, well, I'm willing to bet that you might have a bit of a harder time recalling the most satisfying breath that you've ever taken.
This exploration of breath appreciation is something that we try to do each and every day. And it's kind of early in the morning this morning, and we haven't had a chance to do that yet today. So we'd like to invite you guys to join us in doing that breath appreciation right now. So if you can come up to the edge of your seat and sit up nice and tall. Just relax your belly. Really let it relax. Let it drop. Soften your shoulders. You can even put your hands on your knees. Just sit up nice and tall.
So what we're going to do is we're going to drag out an inhale, right? We'll take one big, long inhale. And at the top of the inhale, instead of just naturally going back into the exhale, just pause for a moment. And in that brief moment of pause, see if you can just tune in to the physical sensation of that breath you took in, right? Feel how the diaphragm has dropped to pull the air in. See if you can feel the rib cage as it's expanded out. See if you can really feel the oxygen-rich blood as it courses through your veins. And then after that brief moment of pause, all together, we'll exhale it out on a big audible sigh, okay? All right, here we go. Take a nice deep breath in. Hold it for a moment. And let it go. That is far more delicious than the best meal I've ever tasted.
And it's more beautiful than the greatest sunrise or sunset I've ever witnessed.
Hell, that felt better to me than the best orgasm I've ever had. No, that's a blatant lie. But I think you get the idea, right? breath appreciation means so much to myself, to us, because I live with cystic fibrosis. And a very real part in living with cystic fibrosis is knowing that my time on this earth is much more limited than your average person, statistically speaking. I know that I only have so many of those long, rich, deep breaths left.
Before we go any further, I think that we should probably introduce ourselves. My name is Brian Stever, and I'm one of the co-hosts and co-producers of Sickboy Podcast.
Yeah, and I'm Jeremie. I'm also a co-host and co-producer of Sickboy Podcast. And once upon a time, I was an actor. Actually, that reminds me. I'll tell a quick little story to give you a little bit of context as to why we're here, how we ended up here. So we'll go back to when I was 16 years old. I went to see a play in my hometown of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and this play was titled Zupa Circus Open Theater Kitchen. And I just want to take a moment to read to you the synopsis of this quirky little play. A wild theatrical feast, Open Theater Kitchen is part comedy, part creation myth, part tragedy, part cooking show. It is the story of two chefs who live alone in a kitchen in a desert. Desperate to combat their loneliness, they cook up the recipe of recipes, the flavor of all flavors, which takes the form of a son. The delight of parenthood soon gives way to panic when the boy encounters the onion, a monstrous, prophetic, transformative force of nature lurking in the root cellar. It possesses him and forces a revolution of imagination, possibility, and rock and roll in the hitherto dreary landscape. What? Sounds like a really weird and quirky play, and it was very interesting. Actually, my favorite part of the whole show was that the entire time the actors are cooking soup on the stage, and at the end of the show, all of the audience members came down onto the stage, and you would enjoy a bowl of soup with the actors while you have this like Q&A. But this wasn't the thing that made this night so remarkable for me at 16. What made this stand out so much for me that night was the performance of one man, one actor, by the name of Ben Stone. Is there anybody in this room, by chance, who knows who Ben Stone is? Yeah, we got one. Okay, perfect. Sweet, perfect. So Ben Stone, by day, he's a teacher. And by night, Ben Stone plays a boy and an onion. And what made this night so special for me was to see his ability to step out onto a stage and to captivate an audience, to literally capture an audience and place them into the palm of his hand, just through the use of his physicality, through the use of his voice, through the use of his breath. And it was this one performance that one night that made me realize, right then and there, from that moment forward, for the rest of my life, I want to be an actor. The worst financial decision I've ever made in my entire life. But that's exactly what I did. I went on to become an actor. So I went to Ryerson Theater School, just down the road from here. And went on to have a career in film and television and on the stage. But acting was more than just a passion, more than just a job. For me, I ended up realizing that acting actually became an incredible form of therapy for me. You see, every time I took on a new role, it gave me an opportunity to wholeheartedly, albeit a short amount of time, wholeheartedly live the life of somebody else. Somebody who wasn't affected by cystic fibrosis. And for me, acting was just as good as a cure. But it also happened to be the thing that led me onto this path of stumbling into the wonderful world of podcasting. So enter Sickboy Podcast.
And for us, Sickboy Podcast started really organically. I had actually just moved home from living abroad for 4 years, and Jeremie and Taylor and I were getting together at the local library for these weekly creative sessions. During one of those sessions, we were talking about some of our favorite podcasts, and like a light bulb moment, we were like, we should make our own podcast. And it turned out that Jeremie was already sitting on this idea for this show where he wanted to sit down and talk to doctors about chronic illness and cystic fibrosis. And Taylor and I thought, that sounds super boring. So we didn't want to let our friends...
Wait, whoa, hold on, what are you saying? There's doctors here, Ryan. Are you saying doctors are boring? boring?
Dude, I stepped in on that presentation earlier, and I didn't understand any of the words that were happening. So we didn't want to let our friend embarrass himself. So we thought, why not take a more comedic approach to this? Plus, selfishly, Taylor and I kind of wanted to be involved too. So we sat down that day and we recorded this hour-long conversation with Jeremie about his cystic fibrosis. And we didn't film that or anything, but we did record it, and we actually are able to play a little bit of that for you guys right now. Hopefully.
Sickboy all began at the Halifax Central Library, and it started really as a joke. It was a free pass for two healthy people to ask all the questions that they would ever want to ask a sick person.
This might be the worst thing that I could possibly say in this moment.
Please
but
say it.
would you say that CF is the equivalent of like YOLO?
Oh my God.
No, what I mean is, you said that
bro. It's so yellow.
you know, you only live once. I've got CF.
Well, that,
Like,
absolutely. As dumb as you phrased that question, you are absolutely right. When your friends don't want to
listen
go
to
out
you.
and like have a good time, you know, you're feeling like you want to go have a few drinks, definitely pull out the, guys, I have CF and I'm gonna die soon, and you're saying no.
It does speak to how comfortable a couple of friends can be with each other to like throw that out there, and me to know that you're joking.
But not really. Like I am joking, but not fully. So that evening, we went back and we listened to what we recorded. And it was the moment where we kind of had this epiphany, like, whoa, maybe we're onto something here. You know, this is the first time that we had heard a long format type conversation surrounding the topic of illness where it wasn't just a complete bummer. You know, it was very funny. It was pretty informative. There was something about it that was really uplifting. So we thought, okay, well maybe this is a fluke, right? We are three best friends. Of course we're gonna find each other funny. We're gonna enjoy our conversation. So can we recreate this, but do it with somebody else? So we put our heads together and we thought of the sickest person we knew at the time. And it just so happened to be an acquaintance of ours. His name is Matthew Amiot, and he had a brain tumor. He just recently had a surgery to remove a brain tumor. So I called Matt up and I said, hey, do you want to come in, step on the mic, and talk about your experience with cancer? And he said yes. Matt came in, we recorded that conversation, and when we listened back, that was the moment where we realized, okay, whoa, this is it. We're clearly touching on something here. It was this hilarious conversation, but it also happened to be powerfully authentic. So raw. And again, it was funny, it was educational, and it was very, very inspiring.
And since the inception of Sickboy, we've recorded now with over 200 guests, with people who experience a variety of illnesses from all around the world. We've recorded episodes on cystic fibrosis, terminal cancer, endometriosis, Crohn's, colitis, psychosis, PCH, PNH, PVH.
All the P's, all the H's.
I now know what those mean. And currently we have 1,000 people who are on a list who are excitedly waiting to share their stories with us.
So we'd like to take a moment now just to put some faces to some of those recordings over the last almost 4 years now. This is Azura. She's actually from here in Toronto. She's recovering from bulimia and anorexia.
This is Jess Grossman. She has an ostomy and models that ostomy for a blog that she does called Uncover Ostomy.
This is Colonel Chris Hatfield. Don't worry, he's not sick. Well, I mean, he's like sick, but he's not. He's not sick. He actually came on the show to talk to us about how space or zero-G actually like wreaks havoc on the human body.
And this is Sarah. She had a tumor in her face, and actually right beside her is also our friend Brandon.
I love this photo. This is Josh Cassidy. Josh Cassidy is a a Paralympic athlete. He is a wheelchair racer. He actually just, like a couple weeks ago, won the Los Angeles marathon in his wheelchair. And I love getting photos with him because I always feel so tall. Because he can't stand. So.
And this is Caleb Stark. He has ADHD, and a little fact about Caleb, he's a huge Britney Spears fan.
And this one actually means a lot to us. This is a really, really important photo for us. So the young gentleman there who is having half of his, well, he only has half a leg, having his leg played guitar on by me. That's Brandon. He was actually one of the youngest guests that we ever had on the show at the time. He was, I think, 19 when we met him. And when he was 18, he was diagnosed with osteosarcoma. He lost his leg at the IWK. And Brandon actually ended up becoming our most repeatable guest. We've had him on more than anybody else because his cancer kept coming back. And so we kept having him on. And we ended up becoming very, very close friends with Brandon. And unfortunately, he lost his battle with cancer last year. So he'll be deeply, deeply missed. So here's the thing: is when we set out to do this little project, we never thought that it would really go anywhere. We didn't think people were going to care about a couple of friends making fart and dick jokes on a mic and happening to be talking about illness at the same time. We didn't think it would go anywhere. But clearly, it didn't take long for us to realize that this was tapping into something that a lot of people needed at the time. And before we go too much further into that, I want to take a moment now to introduce to you someone by the name of Andrew Henderson. Andrew was living with lymphoblastic T-cell lymphoma, and he was terminal, so he was very aware he didn't have very much time left. But before I talk to you about how Andrew handled his death, I want to paint a picture for you of who he was. So we met Andrew at a makeshift recording studio in a hotel room here in downtown Toronto a few years ago. And we get a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and I'm met by this chubby, bright-eyed, fair-skinned, fair-haired, mustachioid, boyish-looking man with freckles, wearing a skin-tight leather pants, a beautiful, voluptuous black fur vest, these long, sharp, ruby red nails. He was wearing an impressive amount of glittery eyeshadow. He was absolutely fabulous. So, we waste no time, and we get straight into talking about his cancer journey. I was going to say, what brings you to our hotel room today?
Well, these three boys messaged me on Grindr and invited me. I just figured.
So if that went over your head, Grindr is an all-male gay dating app. So immediately we knew our senses of humor were gonna mesh. And so we dive right into it. We start to talk about his cancer journey. And Andrew chronicles the struggles of his chemotherapy, the challenges faced with having to phone all his closest friends and family to inform them that he's indeed dying. He talked about the struggles of having to uproot his entire life here in Toronto and move back to his hometown in Winnipeg for treatments. And it sounds really heavy, right? But the conversation was not. It was very light. It was full of joy. It was so chock full of inappropriate humor. And eventually we start to get onto the topic of his ideal funeral, his ideal death.
What, if you were to have your funeral tomorrow, what would be the ideal situation?
So I want to be embalmed in a champagne bottle. It's right here. It's champagne's my life force.
Yeah.
It is like, yeah. So I was like literally talking to glass artists, being like, can you do a life-size, like a human-size champagne bottle?
Which wouldn't be that huge, because I think when you get... Oh, wait. Oh my fuck! You said embalmed in a.
Yeah, like I want to be corpse.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
Holy fuck!
When you first said embalmed, I thought.
I pictured cremated.
Yeah, me too.
Oh
Like
no.
you're talking like
My whole body.
full body.
Just like nude floating and champagne for the
Oh,
rest
yeah.
of existence.
Hold on.
Like a massive, like,
Did anybody go? Yeah, we can do that.
The people who did, I was like, you're the best people to have around. My family was like, that's not happening. And I was like, screw you guys, like, this is my fucking death.
That's when you're like, fuck it, I'm moving to Toronto.
Yeah.
That's the.
And so, when he died, that is exactly what he did. No! Come on! Joking. No. But you know what? What he did do, honestly, I think is far more impressive. Andrew put on this performance art piece titled "Taking It to the Grave," and I want to take a moment to read to you an article that was written about this night and some photos that went along with it. Erica, the hostess, enters and stands on a chair in white jeans and a sheer beaded top. She explains how the night will unfold. She leads us into the space where Glamdrew, this is Andrew's alter ego, lounges shirtless, dressed in white, wearing a glittering gold cat eye mask and makeup. He's spread out on a beige chaise crowned by a Tool champagne bottle topper, encircled by an altar of objects, candles, cloth roses, glittering tchotchkes, a Roman bust, a framed photo of Kim Kardashian. To his right, a shroud of green fabric ghosts dangle above floor pillows, inviting guests to relax and take cover. Dance music throbs through the speakers. There's gold everywhere. People crowd in, finding seats on the floor in the formal seating area in front of Glamdrew, hidden amongst the dangling green ghosts. The performance begins. Erica sweeps gold glitter inside a diamond demarcated by tape between Glamdrew and the audience. She invites us to join her. Behind her, Glamdrew waits for people to approach. They come forward one by one to say goodbye, chat, joke, and sob. Each audience member is invited to confide a regret or secret to Glamdrew. Then Glamdrew, the individual, and tattoo artist Carly Boyce will agree upon a symbol to represent the regret. Glamdrew then has these symbols tattooed on his body. Carly on one side with her stick and poke, the mourner on the other. Over the course of a few hours, I'm showered by glitter, while friends dance together. I exchange words of comfort, make small talk at the manicure bar, dance and sing along to Madonna's Like a Prayer. Camera at the ready, I crouch inches away from family members saying goodbye. At one point, I take a break, crossing back into the other space for a drink of water. Alone and up against a wall, I do a handstand. I don't know why. As the performance draws to a close, Erica showers Glamdrew in champagne while he stands in a kiddie pool. Then she invites audience members forward to pour water over him. And 3 days later, Andrew died.
Andrew was our first guest who passed away. And with Andrew's death came a lot of introspection and reflection for us. We realized that Andrew Henderson was the human embodiment of exactly what Sickboy was striving to be. He was inspiring, he was hilarious, and he taught us to face our own mortality with a sense of beauty and grace. So what makes this podcast work? The first thing is that we allow for uncensored conversation. So I remember from the beginning we thought, Sickboy could be a family show. Seems kind of crazy now. No swearing, no taboo subject matter. But it became apparent when we sat down to record that first episode that wasn't going to work. In order to be real and raw and to get into that gritty conversation about the scariest moments of your life, you have to be able to be totally unfiltered, which means allowing yourself to swear. You know, I know I have a sailor's mouth. We're both from the East Coast, so it was that unfiltered conversation that allowed us to be truly who we are. The second thing that makes Sickboy work is that we were never afraid to ask tough questions. And that's not actually true either. We were at first, but we asked them anyway. We felt like we had created this space where nothing was off limits. It wasn't until we went from talking about physical illness to mental illness that I kind of felt that sense of uneasiness again. I remember we were about to sit down with this young woman who had bipolar disorder. And I was worried. I said to the guys, I was like, is there something that we could say that might cause her to go into a manic episode or like lose her mind? And we were truly worried that in having a conversation with her that we might actually like break her. But we went through that conversation and we approached it the same way we did the other ones before that. And when we got through to the other side, we realized that it's not that you won't ever make mistakes or say the wrong thing, but if you come at that from a place of empathy and compassion, then those mistakes can be forgiven. And the third thing that makes Sickboy work is that we utilize our affinity for humor. You know, Taylor and Jeremie and I, we laugh with one another, we poke fun at one another, and we truly use that humor to get to the real meat of the conversation. We bring that guest in with us, and we allow them to feel like they're part of our friendship dynamic. And those are the three things that really make Sickboy Podcast work.
Actually, speaking about the humor bit, it reminds me that you wouldn't normally say the scariest moment of my life. I found a lot of humor within that, but I have, and it was actually quite recent. So it was very scary for me. It was October 2017. I had a bit of a hospital scare. I come down with intussusception. Not to be confused with the popular Christopher Nolan movie Inception. You know, a dream within a dream within a dream. But intussusception, kind of similar, right? You know, you've got an intestine within an intestine within an intestine. So yes, basically my large intestine. I love that I can say this in front of all of you because you're like, we know intussusception. We also love that movie. But you know, my large intestine was swallowing up my small intestine. And the way that I was thinking about it is like, oh, it's kind of like it's rolling itself in on itself, like you roll up a pair of tube socks. Obviously, that's not good, and so I needed to go in for emergency surgery, and they removed 75% of my large intestine and threw it in the garbage or wherever they put your large intestine when they're done with it. But before all that fun stuff, I had to go through a round of preliminary tests. We were trying to figure out what exactly was going on. We weren't sure what was happening, and I guess one of these tests was your standard rectal exam. Been there, done that. So I'm laying on the bed, the hospital bed, waiting for the doctor to enter. And he enters, and I look up, and I'm greeted by this 6'5", 250-pound beast of a human with these mitts for hands, and he's like kielbasa sausage fingers, and I'm going, this guy? I gotta get a rectal exam from this guy? And he goes, oh, no, it's the resident surgeon, and he ushers in this petite young woman with normal human-sized hands. So I'm like, okay. So she gloves up, you know, takes her finger, buries it knuckle deep into my butt. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a stranger to having a finger in my butt. However, I'm so familiar with having a stranger's finger that far up in my butt. But here's the thing, is she's not so much a stranger. Like, I feel like I know this woman. I just can't quite put my finger on it, pun fully intended. So she finishes, takes her finger out, goes into the hallway to deliberate about whatever it is you deliberate about after having your finger up someone's ass. And then momentarily she comes back in, and I say, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna ask her. So I say, excuse me, ma'am, how do I know you? And this is the first time she makes eye contact with me, and she goes, "Yeah, you're my yoga instructor." So I've been teaching yoga for like the last 8 years, and needless to say, she's not been back to the studio since. Did I say scariest moment of my life? I think I meant most embarrassing moment of my life. All right, so let's rein this back in here. Over the last 3.5, almost 4 years, as you can imagine, over those 200 conversations, there's been a lot of learning opportunities for the three of us, and I would say that there's 3 major takeaways for us, and this is what we truly want to leave with you today. We call them our 3 aha moments. So the first one is, well, let's do the second one. Just throw a curveball at you. So we're gonna go with 2 first.
The second one that we'll start with first is that everybody has an incredible story to tell. When we record this podcast, we just sit down with the average everyday person. There's not a lot of prep work done leading up to it to decide who's going to be on the show. And when we sit down with those people, if you listen back to our entire catalog of episodes, and you really listen, you'll hear 200 enthusiastic people who can't wait to share their stories. And we truly believe that if you ask the right questions and take the time to be an active listener, then you'll find that every single person, no matter who they are, they have an incredible story to tell.
All right, the next one, which is the first one. All right, we're back on track, sort of. Life is too short for small talk, and I really do love this one. Taylor's got this wicked story that he's told on the podcast where he was snowboarding in Utah, and he was by himself. He sits down on the chairlift, and this older gentleman sits next to him, and the chairlift starts up the mountain. And Taylor's, twiddling his thumbs, taking in the beauty of the mountain. And this older gentleman taps him and says, "Hey, I'm Bill, nice to meet you." And Taylor says, "Oh, hi Bill, Taylor, nice to meet you." And then Bill follows that up with, "Well, Taylor, what's the craziest thing you've ever done in your life?" And Taylor's like, "Oh, what? Who starts a conversation like that?" I don't know, I guess, this time I was in Brazil, in the jungle, I almost died, and he tells the story. So Bill follows that up with the craziest moment of his life. And then he follows that up with, "Well, Taylor, what do you like more, snowboarding or sex?" And Taylor's like, "Oh my God, I don't know. Snowboarding's amazing, so is sex." And so it goes like this all the way up the mountain, back and forth, back and forth. And eventually they get to the top of the mountain. And I don't know if you've ever been on a chairlift before, but you choose to go right or you go left, right? Well, Taylor goes right, Bill goes left. Taylor never saw Bill again. But he'll never forget the 5 minutes that they shared from the bottom of that mountain to the very top, where instead of falling into the default of talking about the weather or the scenery, they cut straight through to the shit that matters. Life is too short for small talk. And then the third, I'm guessing, yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll be 6, who knows? Yeah, great, third and final one is your actions can change the world. And I know this sounds very grandiose, but just bear with me for a second. Why did I tell you the story about Ben Stone, the teacher by day and the boy in the onion by night? Well, I told you that story to give you a little bit of insight into how we ended up here where we are. But let's break that down a little further, right? So 16-year-old me goes and sees this play by Ben Stone and a group of actors, and that night sets me on this path to become an actor. Become an actor, and that sets me on the path to finding podcasting. And we start this podcast, and it takes off. And now we have thousands of people across the world tuning in every single week. And out of those thousands of people, we have hundreds of people continuously writing into us emails, messages, letters, to tell us how much this show has changed their life, how it's fundamentally changed the way that they relate to their own illness, how it's changed the way that they communicate with their family or their loved ones. And all of that change stems from that one night, that one performance by that one actor. And for as far as we know, that could have been the shittiest performance of his entire run that week. But for me at 16, it was one of the most pivotal moments of my entire life. Never, ever forget that the actions that you choose, the words that you use, can have a profound effect on the people's lives that you surround yourself with, whether you know it or not.
I'm personally really grateful for being able to learn these lessons through doing this project with my two best friends. And I know that we're extremely proud of where Sickboy has gotten to be today. But it wouldn't be possible without the listeners. Our goal is not only to be a catalyst for to change the way that people talk about illness, but to change the way that people deal with all challenging situations in their life. If there's one thing though that we could leave you with, it would be that after talking to hundreds of people who live with illness, we've learned that there is a delicate balance to strike between the data and diagnoses that are jotted down on a patient's charts and the human experience that goes with that. In order for a patient to have a voice in their healthcare, they need to feel like they have a voice. I'm going to say that again because that's really important. In order for a patient to have a voice, they really need to feel like they are being heard. And Sickboy provides a platform for patients to have a voice. It allows them to speak up. But I want to ask you guys, what role do you play in making those patients feel like they have that voice too?
I want to just cap this off by just taking a moment to say that it is an absolute honor and privilege to have an opportunity to stand in front of the people who are literally making such a change in the lives of the people who live with cystic fibrosis. I know that in Canada, the average life expectancy is, 52? You guys get real specific with it. 52.63. That's amazing, right? Highest in the world? That's incredible. But from my vantage point, that number doesn't mean a thing. It really doesn't. Because I know that all of you know that one day you can be fine, and at the drop of a hat the next day things can go south real quick. And so I just want to say to all of you, thank you so much from the bottom of my lungs. Thank you for doing the work that you do to just get us one step closer to abolishing that number, period, and letting go of an average life expectancy and just finding a cure. So one more time, let's just take a moment to come up to the edge of our seats and appreciate and be grateful for that one automatic physiological response that we so easily take for granted.
So sit up nice and tall, soften your shoulders, relax your belly.
Close your eyes. Just take a nice long inhale. Hold it for a moment. And then let it go. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I think we have time for questions. Is that, do we do? Yeah? Okay, sweet. Do you guys use these mics? Right, it's a small room. I mean, I can hear you, I'm sure. With the yeah, right, because people at home, right? For you. Any questions at all, really? Perfect. The job here is done. We got a couple people. Here we go.
I'm Candace.
Hi, boring Dr. Candace.
I want to know, did you ever meet Ben Stone in person? And if you did, and you did get a chance to, what would you say?
So I have Halifax is a small place. I have met Ben many times over and over throughout my life. And actually, I told that story once at a hospice care conference. And one of the questions during the Q&A, a woman was like, "Have you ever told Ben that story?" And I was like, "No, I have not. I should probably tell him how much of an impact he's had on my life." And so, oddly enough, that same month, Zuka Circus was doing, they still run, still doing shows. They were doing a show in Halifax, actually at an old courthouse. So my wife and I went, and I saw Ben before the show started, and I grabbed him and I was like, "Listen, I gotta tell you something." And I told him the story, and he was very taken by the story and was very moved. I got a message from him like a day later. He was like, "I'm so grateful that you shared that with me, but you totally screwed me up for the night of the performance." Because he got so emotional that it just like totally, I guess it threw. I think he did fine, honestly. But yeah, so he does know how much of an impact he's had on my life.
Hi. No mic. Okay. Patrick, other doctor, Quebec City.
Hi, Patrick.
I was just wondering, where do you think the patient's world in the healthcare world and their personal world should intermingle? Do we doctors, should we leave them their space, or should we get involved? For instance, not a lot of my thanks. Not a lot of our patients have podcasts, but
Yes.
a lot of them have Facebook pages where they discuss in between parents, patients, and they can be angry, they can be sad, they can do pretty much it, but we don't want to get involved.
Yeah, of course.
So should we leave them be and not talk about it and say, you can have your world and discuss it and be angry, be sad, whatever, and then you come back to us, and if you want to talk about it, fine.
Yeah.
If you don't,
Honestly, it's a good question. I mean, I think that obviously I have no idea. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what's being taught to doctors. I don't know what ethics are. I don't know that world. And I understand that like there needs to be a separation. There needs to be distance there. But you know what? I should say this, and I feel very proud to be a part of the Halifax CF community. I know Fran's not here, but I feel, although Fran, I can tell she does a very good job of keeping an arm's distance, but I also feel that every time I'm in clinic and I'm at that office, that I feel like Fran is a friend, and I feel like I can share things with her, or not, and that's okay. So I don't think it's whether or not you should be involved or not be involved, but more so, I think it comes down to the interactions that you will inevitably have with these patients. How much of your own humanity can you bring to that, and just like be there, hold space for that person. The one thing, and again, I can't speak to this because I really haven't felt that. I mean, whether it's from being at the IWK or moving on to the adult clinic, I always felt very heard and seen. But out of the 200 conversations we've had on the podcast, God, I'd say like 90% of them, they all come to us and say, the one thing I wish I had in my healthcare was that I felt not like some number on a piece of paper, but like a human. And I think that, it goes a long way just to hold space with someone while you're in that room with them and let them feel like they're a human and not just a patient. Yeah.
We also we had a young gentleman on our podcast last weekend who was on a heart transplant waiting list, and he has a young family, and he said that his cardiologist is actually his therapist too, and it was kind of, you know, the way that he put that in the relationship that he has with that person is he feels like he can call them anytime and have this, you know, this ear when he needs to talk about how he's feeling. And that's not, you're not going to be able to have that relationship with all of your patients, but I think if you're, like Jeremie just said, like if you're open to that human experience and finding the humanity in the situation, then there's probably a lot more opportunities for connections like that to be made too.
Hi, you guys are pretty edgy. Put it mildly. And I was wondering, is that a conscious effort? Are you trying to break down walls, and do you ever find that it actually gets in the way sometimes? I'm just curious.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a conscious effort, because I think I naturally, I think I can speak for the three of us. I think we've always kind of just been that way, especially with each other. And I mean, my sense of humor has always kind of fallen into that sort of realm of kind of pushing the line, towing the line, and pushing the boundaries. And up to this point, I've found that it's actually been it's been a tool that's been very effective in allowing people to feel like, oh, I can be myself. And whether myself is stuffy and not edgy and not towing the line, I can be myself, because I can see that you are being authentic and you're being yourself. So yeah, I don't think it holds me back. But also, I don't know what's going through other people's minds. I'm not a mind reader, so I have no idea.
I think it's hard sometimes because, you know, especially when we're at events like this, and there are people who come up to us and they're like, you know, like, I'd love to share your content with like my board of directors or something, but you know, I don't think they're gonna appreciate your dick jokes. And you, like, we realize the impact that we're having to a certain audience, but I sometimes feel like I wish that we could, you know, have the same impact on a broader scale. It's like when we talk about that point of wanting it to be a family show. You know, we want to have the biggest impact that we can, but we feel like in order to really speak to our audience and our listeners, we just have to be ourselves, and this is who we are.
Hi there, Mark Chalmers from Vancouver. I've got two questions for you. The first one, which I think most people in the room will want to know the answer to: sex or snowboarding?
No comment. Well, let's put it this way: I don't know how to snowboard.
Nice answer. So the other thing is, having done 200 interviews, you must have certain themes which come through from those interviews. Have you ever done like the best bits of Sickboy to do a thematics podcast?
No, you know, we sort of, I think on our 100th episode we might have did like a recap, but we've never really done a best of. I feel like we're sitting on just like a treasure trove of and I know that maybe I don't know, but I feel like this word amongst like the medical community is kind of like, oh, okay, here we go. But I feel like we have a treasure trove of like anecdata that could be very valuable, but I'm too dumb to know what to do with it. So really, we're just kind of going along and having fun with what we're doing. But it is interesting to see like the different, like you mentioned, the themes that come up. I mean, death is one that comes up almost every single episode. You know, and whether or not that's because it's something that's on my mind constantly, I'm not sure, but it's just fascinating. It's just interesting to see.
I think one of the interesting things that so at the end of every episode we ask the two of the same questions. We ask, what is the biggest thing this has taken from you? What is the biggest thing this has given you? And I'm always fascinated by the similarity in the answer of what it's given people. So often we hear the word perspective and empathy and more often than not they'll say, I wouldn't trade this in. Like my illness, it doesn't have to define me, but it's certainly part of me, and I wouldn't change that for the world. And as somebody who is, you know, for the most part healthy, whatever that means, I'm always blown away by that, and I think it's a really empowering message to people who live with illness.
I'm curious on.
It's so jarring, like with the voice, because I'm like, where is it coming from?
So I'm curious about your process. In the beginning, it was you knew Jeremie and then you knew someone else. So now you're very popular. And how do you decide, like, do you have a list of illnesses that you want to tackle? Or I know people are coming to you, but like now that you're so successful, what's the process to get to guess?
Yeah, we still don't really have one. We have. I mean, so we have again a list of. I think we just surpassed 1,000, or we're just about to get to 1,000 people that have applied to be on the show. And they go to our website. There's an application form. It goes into a spreadsheet. And the way that we go about it is we open up that spreadsheet and we decide, okay, where are we in the world? Like, what city are we in? Who's in the city that's applied? Who lives in the city that has applied? And can we touch on mental illness at least once within this month? So we try to do mental illness like on average once a month. Other than that, it's like, this person doesn't have eyes or ears or legs. Let's talk to that. That sounds interesting. How does that work? We really just base it off of what we're kind of interested in hearing. That, the guy that we were just recently talking to, I think his application was like, I have a mechanical heart on the outside of my body. And I'm like, what? Yeah, come in, let's talk about that. So it's really just kind of what we're kind of fascinated in. Or if there's something that needs to be touched on. There's actually specifically, I know that there was a gentleman here in Toronto who just recently had his 3rd transplant, and I want to get his sister Jillian on the show and just talk to her, because that again, it's like, yeah, it's amazing. It's so amazing. So is he? I know patient confidentiality, but like, is he okay? It worked? Okay, great, thank you. Hi.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Just going back to hard questions, you talked about a young woman with bipolar disorder with whom you spoke, who you were afraid of breaking her. Are there any conversations that you've found really tough, or any guests you've had where you felt like, oh my goodness, this is going to break me, or where you've had to kind of think about it, or that were hard to do as the interviewer? And how do you kind of, when you've got all that going on, how do you kind of keep your own perspective?
Yeah, recently we spoke with actually a good friend of ours, Estelle, and
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, Estelle's baby died. Estelle's and Tommy was what? Tommy was 2 years old, and that hit very close to home. We attended Tommy's funeral. And this happened a few years ago. It was a couple of years, like maybe 2.5 years ago. We had never talked to Estelle about that process and about what that was like for her or her husband. And going into that conversation, I was really nervous. And then in the midst of that conversation, I realized, like right then and there, like how hard it is for me personally to like deal with other people's grief. And I completely broke down. And Estelle was like, held it together so well and like brought me back up. And it was very scary and very challenging, but it was so beautiful. It was such a beautiful conversation.
There was a really interesting moment in that conversation where like I learned that this is one of the most profound things that I've learned in the entire duration of doing this podcast. During that conversation, when Jeremie was breaking down, he looked at Estelle and he said, Estelle, I can't imagine what you're going through. And she looked back at him and said, yes, you can. And he said, no, I can't. She said, no, yes, you definitely can. And he's like, I can't. And in that moment I realized, oh yeah, he can, but he just doesn't want to. And then I realized how alienating that would have been for her to say that you can't imagine what she's going through, because it's hard. Like it's really hard to imagine. But if you're not even willing to try, then you're immediately building that barrier between you and the person that you're speaking to. So in that moment, I was like, maybe I should remove, or at least be more conscientious of when I use "I can't imagine" in a situation. And I thought that was really profound.
Thanks. Now do you have what's the funniest joke that's ever come up on your podcast, just to lighten the atmosphere?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I don't know the funniest thing. Yeah, I have no idea.
We drank breast milk once.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did that. It's really good. It's honestly really good. Yeah. Well, we're gonna end on that note. That's
Thank you very much, guys. And I think we're on breast milk question. I didn't care for myself.